Hi, Mikhail. Thank you for taking time. And let's jump into it immediately. So I understood that you are fighting for the inclusion of traditional and classic architecture, that it's neglected. But also what I understood is that you're exposing a non-democratic process in urbanism, in how urbanism is being decided, how cities are being built, how buildings look like, how they function, that this is extremely centralized and only few people decide. And, you know, like your disliking of modernist architecture kind of, for me, exposed this. I was never thinking about this before in such an extent, but I found your videos, I think on the Cave of Appel, and I was like, whoa, this guy is very much right. I mean, he's really exposing the whole process in Sweden and other countries, how cities are being built without much participation from the people who live there, you know. So is that a correct description? Did I get it right?
Oh, yes. Thank you very much for having me, by the way. It is a very, very correct description. And there's, you know, always a discussion as who's to blame, who's responsible. And most people would say, oh, it's the developers and corrupt politicians. But I say, no, they did not create the discourse, you know, the subject, the frame. What is architecture today? What is city planning today? That happened in architecture school. They degraded their own profession and they introduced relativism. And also they succeeded in silencing politicians very, very effectively using different methods.
Yeah. So I mean, I really recently I got caught up with this sort of relativism, which for me is kind of the same as nihilism, you know, where experts are trying to pretend that's my impression. They're trying to pretend there is no ideology, yet there is actually a very strong ideology, even if not formalized. You know, sometimes they cannot formalize it, they're not aware. But as you talk with them and they start giving you yes, no, you understand that there are actually underlying rules that are very strong and very, very specific.
Oh, yes, yes. It is very much so. They will never recognize that they follow a certain ideology and they say, oh, but everyone's allowed to build exactly how you want. But then as soon as you show a classical example, they will either try, you know, to suppress it, you know, the whole discussion, or they will complain that it's wrong, that it's historic, it's pastiche, you know, they have all kind of these bad names if people want a beautiful built environment. So they are, I would say, it's hard to say if today, if they are indoctrinated at architecture schools or if there has become a self-selection. You know, the only people that want to become architects today are people that like, you know, ugly, strange buildings. So it's like how to say, it's a self-creating system now, by now. So you get a selection to architecture schools, people that have no drawing talents and that like strange shapes, and also that have an identity. Identity is very important for people, and they have this identity. I probably pronounced this word wrong, but you know, avant-garde. You know, they see themselves as they are in front line, and they understand somehow they are like, you know, artists and these journalists. They are the front line of culture, and only they understand, you know, what is beauty and what is ugliness. And all other people that just complaining, that they are either uneducated or they have very suspicious extreme right wing or even Nazi sympathies. So, yeah, that's where we are today in this regard.
So your impression is that it comes from education, that essentially the schools are teaching the wrong things. So my impression a little bit, because I work with, I'm a consultant and I have a startup, you know, I focus on openness and I work with people in construction. I talk often to architects, sometimes high level, you know, a friend of mine that I did previously an interview, he was teaching at Harvard and CUNY and like 4 universities in the States. And I spoke to other, you know, people who work in big companies and stuff. And I think they're all very, very hardworking people, you know, and
no, I have no doubt. I have no doubt.
And they are highly intelligent and they are also very wise in some aspects. But I do agree with you that when I talk about some basics that are outside architecture, they are not aware. Like my impression is that they're extremely specialized. They are not aware of some kind of, like, for example, what's happening in very superficial philosophy, like basic philosophy in the last 10, 15, 20 years. They're not aware of that. They're not aware of the criticism of postmodernism, modernism, the return of traditionalism and stuff like that. They're not aware of
I would say that they can be very, very polite. They can be wonderful and nice people. But when it comes to their profession, they neither know architecture or urbanism. They don't know how to create it. They can only parasite on, the old existing, but they cannot create new because their minds, they have been conditioned so very, very much that you're only allowed to do in a certain way. You're only allowed to think in a certain way. Also, even more importantly, you're only allowed to look ahead. You're never allowed to look back for wisdom and experience. It's like everything that is old is bad, except if it's modernist from the 1960s. So we must always look forward. It's this view of man, human beings as some kind of linear progress, that we are somehow better human beings than people that lived 100 years ago. So we cannot possibly learn anything from them. It's the mind view. And this spreads. They have introduced a lot of concepts, as I told you in the beginning of the interview, a lot of concepts in the broader culture. And this is, of course, not architecture, it's art, it's everything. And the most important one, yes, nihilism, but relativism. That there's no such thing as objective beauty. It's just in the eye of the beholder. And if you're a construction company, you get very happy when you hear that. All the beautiful buildings in central Belgrade or Stockholm or Paris, they were built on speculation. They were built by greedy developers that built it on speculation. Yeah. But it's damn good. And today, when you say relativism, okay, if you're a developer, fine, I build a square cube, a concrete cube, and I'll just say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and no one can criticize me for it.
Well, I think my impression is that I think architecture has the easiest way. It is the nicest one. I mean, just look at the food. My impression is just look what happened at the food and all the diseases and the problems we have, because the same thing happened. They switched from locally produced healthy food that was tested over thousands of years, recipes that were handed down and people knew how to make food. And suddenly, everything is replaced by industrialized food that is extremely low quality. And I don't know how it is in Sweden, but I'm living in Serbia. I grew up in Serbia. I lived in many places, Italy, USA, Africa, etc. I grew up in Africa, but I've been in Serbia, let's say now, because my kids are here, I've been for a longer time, and I remember how it was before. And literally in my lifetime happened maybe what happened in Sweden, the generation before you, or what happened in America maybe 2 generations ago, is that I grew up with my mom making homemade foods. Basically buying vegetables from some farmer, and we had a bunch of stuff around the home where we are making these kind of foods, and you buy raw materials. And now when I look at my fridge, or I there is no other way. I mean, everything is processed, and that's the same thing I see. This idea of modernism, where modernism was very effective in medicine, in engineering, because it just, there is no way in medicine you want to go back because you're going to be dying. So the new knowledge.
It's a very rationalistic view of things. The problem is that we are human beings. When it comes to, a home is not a place where you store humans. So if you attack the problem of housing that build more storage for humans, you're not creating homes. We are not robots. So, there's a place for emotions in some fields and not in others. But when it comes to housing, you have to create homes because we are human beings. So yes, you want a lot of positive feelings when you see your home. And classical architecture gives you so many positive feelings. It's beautiful. You can feel nostalgia. You can feel warmth. You can feel uplifted. You can feel curious. It's a wide range of positive feelings that goes through your head. You don't need to think. It's just unconscious when you see a beautiful classical building. Why wouldn't you want that? And compare it when you see, a concrete slab. Of course, you can have fond memories if you have your childhood there, but you will not think that it's a beautiful or homely environment. You would not like your own children to grow up in similar place. You will always try to get somewhere else. And that's the situation we have all over Europe. You know, as soon as people can, they leave these housing blocks. In Western Europe, these, you know, concrete suburbs that they created in the 60s, they are all left now. There's only first generation immigrants that live in them now. And when I say immigrants, it's immigrants, often immigrants with low economic and social capital, you know, usually from Middle East and Africa, the people that have not been able to leave them yet. But everyone wants to leave, man. No one wants to stay there. It's just temporary housing. It's storage for humans. No one calls it home.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you that there is value. I mean, as I told you, as I wrote to you in an email in preparation, that we had an office in Palladio, you know, Palazzo Zeppo da Porto, you know, for 2 years. So, and I also worked in Tadoando building, and I grew up in blocks in Belgrade, and I lived all over the place, you know, also in like a old traditional villa in Stellenbosch in South Africa. So I experienced a lot of different places. And I mean, every place has its beauty, every place has its problems. You know, I can definitely guarantee that working in an office designed by Palladio with marble and a 5-meter tall ceiling we will not be able to have this Zoom meeting. You know, it's like the echo there is super crazy.
Okay, so then you take a smaller building. It's a very solvable problem, but it's quite nice with 5-meter high.
But anyway, that's my point is that there is, but the value I feel when I look at tradition, when I look at classical, and why I want to be surrounded by this. For example, I baptized my son recently, and I was always anti-religion, and I now, you know, I'm coming back into it. I mean, I'm not religious, but I appreciate it. Is because I'm connected to something that existed longer than me. I feel part of something longer. So it's not about, for me, the visual beauty. I mean, some buildings could be beautiful or not, or whatever, but it is this feeling of being connected to something that existed before me that gives me confidence and makes me feel comfortable that I'm part of something that is more. As you said, immigrants that come from one country to another, and I was an immigrant many times in my life. Legal one, okay, it's not just a type. So you know, I did enjoy to appreciate as much as I can of the local place, of the tradition of the local place. I didn't want to be excluded from it, you know. So that's why I would understand any immigrant coming from anywhere, you know, that they want to be.
No, the first concern when you move to a new country and have, you know, don't have much money is of course housing over your roof, and that's why you end up in this place which no one else wants. So that's very basic. And when it comes to tradition, you don't have to be ashamed if you're religious. You know, I go to church regularly, even though I'm Lutheran and you are Serbian Orthodox. And the thing with that is that it's the same with architecture. We are reminded there live people before us, and also important, there will live people after us. You and I will be dead in 100 years, but there will be people after us, and we're just part of a chain in history. So it's a very different perspective. I don't see myself better than people that lived 100 years ago, and I know for sure that people in 100 years will not be better than I am today. We are the same humans as we've always been. If you read, you know, literature from, if you read the Bible, or if you read any literature that's thousands or 2,000 years ago, you'll see that people are more or less the same. They struggle with the same problems, you know. They feel guilt, they feel angst, they feel pleasure, they feel, you know, they are envious, they are passionate. Everything's just the same. What changed is technology, but we as humans didn't change a single bit. We are not smarter and we are not dumber than any people that lived before us. Their accomplishments are more impressive than ours, since they created all this that we want to live in and that we somehow can't recreate today.
Yeah. Well, the way I see it is that we are creating new knowledge now, but we are destroying more than we create. And as I said before, I think in medicine that's fine, because the knowledge that was not curing, clearly in medicine and science, the new knowledge is better than the old. So there is no, but a lot of these activities are pretending to be science. Like architecture is not science. It doesn't prove that the old is worse, that it doesn't have that rigid truth factor, you know, just like medicine or science have. Is not science. And they're pretending that they are science, and they're saying that the old is wrong and we should only use the new. And this is destroying, in my experience, this is destroying enormous amount of wisdom and knowledge that was accumulated over time. I'm not talking hundreds of years, I'm talking thousands of years. This knowledge was accumulated and suddenly it's being destroyed. And the younger generations, I mean, we both have kids. Younger generations have no contact with that knowledge. You know, the generation of my father had contact with that knowledge. I have very little contact with that. But the new generations, I mean, it's really a struggle to connect them. You know, it's really difficult. And I'm worried that, you know, and I see that as a I wouldn't say it's a conspiracy or some kind of design, but I think people are rushing too much to make a quick profit, as you say. Construction companies, centralized power, they won't change, they want to reform the world, but they really don't know how to do it.
No, that's because they are not allowed. They have been taught that they are not allowed to look back. And they are not allowed to learn from the best, you know.
But there
is something called, you know, there is something called reverse engineering. You know, if you see something great and you don't know how to do it, then, you know, pick it to pieces and see what works. And then you do the same. So it's very easy to see with your own eyes, with your intuition. Oh, why do people prefer, you know, the beautiful traditional city quarters? Why do they do that? And then, oh, has it something to do with the aesthetics? Has it to do with urbanism? Has it something to do with width of streets? Has it something to do with height of buildings? You know, you just process and you divide, and then you figure out if you absolutely don't want to open a book, you can just look at it and then you analyze what is it that makes these places so attractive. And then you know, separate the pieces and then you create a new, instead of I'm not, and like having in your spine that you are never allowed to look back. You have to make something new all the time, and it doesn't matter if the new is worse than old, at least it was new. And this is very important to say, that the most important attribute for all the architects that you meet, usually, there are of course a handful of Serbian architects that I know that do classical and vernacular, is that a building is new. That's the only attribute they care about. If it's good, don't care. If it's, you know, does it function, doesn't care. It's new. No one has ever done anything like this. So it can be as absurd as it is, you know, it's new, and that's the most important.
I think I'm interested in what you said, looking back, because for me it's not about looking back. I think that is just for me it's more about that they're literally deleting knowledge and value that exists now. So it's just by accident that knowledge was created 1,000 years before or 500 years before, but they're literally deleting it now. So they're not, when you say looking back, I don't think that's a good way to put it, because it seems like, again, it's something from the past. It's not something from the past. It's an extremely important value that's going to be useful 1,000 years from now, because it was useful 1,000 years before, and they're deleting it now. They're stopping it now. It somehow survived through all the nonsense that we had in the last, I don't know, God knows how many years. And suddenly they're deleting it now with this extreme, you know, this extreme ideology. And again, I see value in modernism. There is things that are very valuable, you know, that I think it's good to do some things new. I see some value in postmodernism as well. I see a lot of value in tradition, in classicism, in all the things before. I just think that they should all work together, and then the new things shouldn't monopolize. They shouldn't monopolize things, and they shouldn't be so fast. They should take much more time, and they should be very careful, very careful, because as they create new things, they're deleting a lot of the things that are not old things. I wouldn't say old things, but proven things.
Yeah. The thing is that an overwhelming majority of people are very conservative. And when I say conservative, this word has been so misused, you know, from its original meaning. People confuse conservative with the reactionary. Conservative is that you are for change, but only if it's good. So you choose, you know, you change if the new is better, but not if the new is worse. Then you keep the old. And that's how you accumulate wisdom, you know, through the generations. What's bad, you remove, and if you have something that is better, then you take it. But if it's not better, then you reject it. And so it has been with, you know, all subjects. So now if you come back to food, yes, as you notice, you know, your mother could cook, you grew food locally, and now everything is processed. So what's happening in most Western countries? Now we're trying to reverse it. So a lot of people, you know, they bake their own bread. Again, you know, it was seen as being poor, you know, to bake your own bread 30 years ago. Now we bake our own bread again. People make their own sausages. They are very, very, conscious about, what the ingredients are of the food they eat. So everything's coming back. And same thing, with handicraft. Oh, that's, only grandmas did it. Now we buy these plastic new things, and now it's coming back because people realize that it had so much more wisdom that we took for granted and didn't understand. And now we bring it back. And when it comes to architecture, well, if you take local vernacular Serbian architecture or local vernacular Swedish or Norwegian architecture, it's adapted for the place. You use local building materials and it's adapted for the climate. So you have all these small solutions in the buildings. If it rains a lot, then you create certain types of roofs and you put the facade, maybe it goes in a little bit. So it's all these small techniques, the wisdom that have been accumulated for hundreds of years, and people build that way. And then you see these modern buildings that can be built anywhere that are not adapted for climate, and they get all these problems, be it they are too hot or they are too cold, they need a lot of electricity to heat, or they start molding because they
their power
they reject everything, every past wisdom.
Yeah, they don't serve the. I mean, I worked in a lot of buildings like that. They don't serve the people inside. They serve they are what I call Instagram architecture, even before Instagram. I mean, Tado Ando is a great sculptor, but I really don't like the building.
No, it's coffee table architecture. You should have it on like your coffee table, and you have just this black and white photography of this building, and you should admire it in a book, but you don't want to admire it in real life. Exactly. A majority of modernist architects, I would say, both in Sweden and UK, I don't know how it is in Serbia, but in most countries, all the modernist architects, they both live and have their offices in classical buildings in classical quarters. So they build modernism for others, but they say we want to live in, classical. And the funny thing with this, they haven't realized how hypocritical this is.
Yeah.
Why don't they want to live in, environment that they created? It's not a conspiracy. It's just, what you call a cognitive dissonance. They don't see that their own preferences are the preferences of everyone else. Everyone wants to live in a classical, classical quarter and classical buildings. They don't want to live in these sterile housing blocks.
For one of the clients, for one of our Italian clients, as a PR project, we saw that one of the Frank Lloyd Wright's buildings was to be demolished, and they had a tender. There was a 6 months period to buy it off. And we tried to buy it off, and we decided not to, and to take it to Italy. So for me, it was always absurd that me from Serbia would care so much and to, convince my Italian client to put a ton of money and to try to save a house built by the most notable American architect, which is also, modernist, but still part of their tradition, because he was trying to, for them, he's old already, But anyway, that was shocking to me. That happened 2 years ago. But anyway, just to explain, that's what interests me is that, so you're saying that the problem is in education. As I said, I think architects are very specialized. They're educated as engineers, as designers, but they're not educated about what ideology is, how ideology works. They don't understand those things usually. They think they do because they write a couple of papers, but they don't. For example, just to give you an example, I was teaching design in Austria, and I was teaching a master class, and I'm not sure, but I think I'm the first one that forced students to just write full text A4 page about analysis. I was teaching visual analysis. So, and that was, I think they didn't do a lot of that before, in the 4 or 5 years of education. That's graphic design, that's visual design. And that's a good school, and I don't know, I think in architecture, they do write, they do read, but they don't really go deeply into that. They're focusing so much on pure architectural knowledge, and they just follow the trend. And then there is the other problem is that they cause damage through their design. And they cause damage because they're very closed and they make decisions unilaterally, and they believe what they're doing is good because they are not opened up, ideologically. And then another problem is that someone starts building that, and then again, they don't listen. They just go like a bulldozer in a glass store, and they just do whatever they want, and they don't listen to people, how it affects. So those are two problems, that When they start designing, or maybe 3, education, then they start to design unilaterally, not asking anybody anything. And then when they build it, they again don't care what people say, and they keep repeating the process over and over again, believing that, you know, kind of like it's a fashionable thing. And this is something that I consider extremely undemocratic. For me, it's absurd that this happens in democratic countries. You know, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And I think this is like a huge problem, because I mean, I'm going to go that far to say that, okay, if democratic countries are talking about spreading democracy, talking about democracy, and then you go and you see people cannot even get the house on their block the way they want, and nobody's listening to them. I mean, your basic emotion was that you got upset. You got 10 years ago, you got upset, and you got so upset that you have to campaign about it for a decade. And you know, and you have to campaign even more.
Even more so, I had to have a way to communicate. You know, people have been complaining about modernism since, you know, it first, you know, the first building, but they were suppressed because, you know, there were only newspapers and radio, and, you know, it was always easy to just, you know, suppress it and, you know, have it, you think that way and I think that way, and then we bury it. Because a part of the conspiracy, I would say, are the cultural journalists, because they have the same self-image as the modernist architects. You know, that they understand better, and the masses don't know their own best. They won't say it, but that's what they really believe, that they understand things somehow better than everyone else. But at the same time, as I mentioned, you know, journalists also overwhelmingly live in, you know, traditional buildings in traditional environments. So modernism is something that you do for other people, but not for themselves. So they have suppressed, you know, dissidents. But with social media, everyone that has something good to say can get a megaphone, and this has resonated a lot with the public because a lot of people feel the same. But a lot of people thought that, maybe I'm the only one complaining, you know, and then you vote with your feet. You know, you try to live in as a beautiful neighborhood as you can, as much as your pocket, you know, allows you. And that's the way how you complain.
Yeah.
But you haven't voiced, you know, that maybe we shouldn't build this ugly. You stop projects. People have always protested ugly projects, but that's not the same thing as proposing that.
No, I don't consider. I think protests are not a sign of democracy. I think there are. I mean, we had, you know, in Serbia. I mean, there was enormous amount of protests when it was not. When it was a fascist country in the 90s, when it was not a democratic country, but they're a sign of not having democracy, because nobody's asking you in advance. Then at the end you figure something out, and then you get upset, you know. Like now in China, they're protesting, you know. And whenever you have protests, that means it's not democratic, you know, because people they suddenly find out something's wrong and they're like super upset.
Yeah.
Just like you're protesting on social media. My question is, you know, why is that happening? And more importantly, how can that be fixed? How can people, I mean, what would be an ideal situation? The architects are educated to listen more, that they're not there as a top of the pyramid delivering the knowledge down, but they have to absorb the knowledge from bottom and from the history, and to understand, to put it all together, to be moderators of all this knowledge. And then the second part is when they start working on projects, they need to listen to everybody who is affected. I mean, not only people living there, but literally everybody. And then when they build it, they still need to continue listen and try to fix whatever damages that nobody could predict, because there is always damages that you cannot predict. I mean, if you make a business card, there's going to be a damage. You need to listen and adjust and fix it in the next iteration. And so how can we reach that? I mean, do you agree this is a correct process? This is the 3-step process that could be done. That's something that
they won't listen. The first thing, every educated architect will 99% will not listen, because it's very much, and I know you had a different relationship to communism in former Yugoslavia than, you know, most other countries, because you had a different version. But, you know, if you have believed in this your entire life and suddenly you realize that everything was a lie, it's kind of painful. Most people don't want that. So they will instead double down. And that's what's happening with modernism. You know, the more you show that you are totally wrong, the more they will double down on modernism, because they don't want to believe that everything they did was a lie and was wrong. So there's no, it's it's not a purpose to make modernist architect listen. Instead, there are two other categories of people that should listen. Foremost, it is the politicians, the elected politicians, because they can override the architects. They can override the architects, they can override the developers. They set the rules for the game for how you build the cities. But then they must be educated, or at least they must be connected with people that know, classical architecture and classical city planning, so that they can get help in making good, regulations and decisions. The second phase is that these politicians will also start a new architecture school where you teach students classical architecture and classical city planning. And then slowly we're, phasing out the modernists and replace them with, classical architects and bureaucrats, in all levels, because it's not only architects, it's at the municipalities, who approves, it's the city engineers, everyone more or less needs to be
I think
re-educated. So who should listen? Politicians. And politicians should listen and understand that they know very little about this subject, so they should bring the right people to give them correct advice. Because if the politicians want classical and then they ask the usual suspect, they ask the modernist, it's like the devil reading the Bible. You will get crazy, ugly, pretending to be classical. You will not get classical because you will ask, the wrong people that have no interest in this, doing progress, doing good.
Well, I'm skeptical that it's going to work, because politicians, as much as I know them, they're always going to go to whatever is the safe. And the safest thing for them is whoever has the most press, whoever is the star architect. And they're always going to go for that. Like, there is no way, like a mayor of Milan is going to risk going to an unknown architect or something. Like, they're going to go to whoever is the safest for them, so they can, And the problem, one of the analyses that I did a while ago, is that a lot of these architects that are doing architecture in Africa, because I know people who do architecture there, who build new things in Africa, in anywhere here, in Western Europe, everywhere around the world, Asia, they all actually come from a couple of places. It's usually Chicago, London, New York, and that's it. And they're all either work with like some of the big firms. I don't want to name them here, or schools, but it's extremely centralized. It's unbelievably centralized. And again, these people they usually come from a system which believes in extreme specialization, and they are told this is correct, and they have millions of dollars or billions even to produce. I mean, just a few weeks ago, I had a meeting with one of the top partners in a top firm, and they have constant training, they have constant a refreshing of these ideas, but they're only operational ideas. They're not discussing the things that we're discussing. They're not interested in philosophical approach. They're interested only in operational, and a lot of that operational knowledge is masked as high level knowledge, but it's not. It's all operational knowledge. They're being extremely specialized, and I'm just focusing on this, that they will not listen, because I don't think politicians will. It's always going to go back to this, like 5 places on planet Earth, to this biggest country.
No. Politicians can listen if there is something for them, and that's why social media
architects.
That's why social media is important. Before, we have come quite far in the Scandinavian countries with the social media strategy and creating an uproar of ordinary people expressing. And what happened is that politicians see that this can be a game changer. It's very even between the political parties. So a way to attract more voters and get more popular by voters is to adopt the classical approach. Most politicians have no idea how you build classical or anything, but they see that it can be an election winner. So what we got now in Sweden, we got very, very, very few classical architects, but we got many municipalities, and our second biggest city, the local social democrats there that won the recent municipal election that was, this September, they are on a platform now to stop building ugly boxes and building new classical architecture that people want. They didn't, realize this themselves. They followed the social media and saw the Swedish architecture uprising, and they saw that this is what people want, what ordinary people want, not a small eliter. This is what our ordinary people want. They want a beautiful built environment. They don't want only the rich be able to live in a beautiful built environment, because what happened is that the rich are the only ones able to buy the little classical architecture that is, in the total built environment. Everyone else is have to go with the modernists because that's what they can afford. So you can change politicians if they see that it's a winning formula for them, that they can attract votes for it. This we have succeeded with in Sweden. So more and more politicians are listening now. Not that they know anything about classical architecture or city planning, but they know that this is what they should say. And it gives, gradual results. So we got a few buildings built now, and we got many, many more projects, that have been approved. This is very big because Sweden is, very homogeneous in mindset. You do only one thing at a time, changing, the mind and making some people do things differently. That's a very big thing here. So it can change. You can change. You can change every politician if they see that they can win more from listening to this public uproar than being friends with local architects. And to add to this, that is why the capitals are usually the last place that where this change comes, because in the capitals, the politicians are part of an establishment. They hang out with journalists, architects, all these fancy people. They live in the same addresses. Their kids go to the same schools and parties, but not so in the countryside. In the countryside, they don't, or in the smaller cities, they don't have this establishment. So the politicians are much more, they have no personal loyalties to any architect or journalist. So they can be much more free to listen to the public, because that matters much more to them if they want to get re-elected and if they want to, get good press.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm thinking, Sweden is one of the most democratic countries, and but still, it leaves the problem that the power is still on the politicians. And I would prefer, because I believe much more in openness rather than representation. I think representation is fine as long as there is an element of openness, meaning that they have to constantly listen and constantly update. And even if they adopt classical or traditional architecture, they still should continue and fix errors, because there's always going to be errors. Like, for example, I'm assuming you want 100% traditional classical architecture. Is that correct? So yes. you would completely erase. I disagree with that, because I think that I appreciate that you have this drive and I think it's very interesting, but I still think there is some value in everything else, So in every period, in every phase, there is something valuable. There is, what I don't like is monopoly of a single idea, I think that there should be multiple perspectives, multiple styles, multiple everything, so we can all learn from we can constantly absorb knowledge from different parts.
This I must stress, I'm not for a certain styles. I'm for the classical tradition. So this is very important to stress, because the reason why I'm against modernism is not that I'm against certain styles. The modernism tradition, it's frameworks. It frameworks how you design a building. There are unlimited amount of styles. If you go to an Italian city, you'll see buildings from different eras and different styles next to each other. They are all equally, beautiful, but they are different, but they are different kinds of beauty. So that's why I'm against modernism, because modernism has in its ideology and its philosophy, there's no view that beauty is a necessity. It's like the whole ideology has muted now to only the cult of the new. So the most important thing is that the building is new, not that it's good. So it's a failed ideology, and I don't see any reason why we should have that failed ideology in our built environment. So styles, build any style you want, as long as it follows the framework and the mindset of how you create a building.
Yeah, I slipped there. I'm sorry.
I know you're like, because it's not like an eternal 19th century. It's not that everything's looked in 19th century. It's the framework. What was the mindset when they created this building? How did they divide facade, proportions, everything?
Well, what do you consider? Well, I mean, I agree. By style, I meant idea. The idea. So the way I see modernism, the way I see it, is that it's efficiency, you know, and in some cases, in like medicine and science is great. That's it. That's what we want. I want to cure 1,000 people in one day. That's efficiency, but it has nothing to do with 99% of personal life, of people, you know, where people don't want efficiency. Like creativity is not efficient, family is not efficient, because we don't understand it. It's too complicated for us to understand it at the moment. And, you know, especially because I also, for example, an interesting view should be on artificial intelligence, because AI, I mean, you're worried about modernism. I mean, they're already creating algorithms to automatically design buildings. You know, I mean, I don't know if you're aware, they're already copy pasting plans from one country to another. They don't even design new buildings. And now they're just going to use AI to customize a little bit and just slap and make everything the same. And I beg you, please don't go to Florida, you know, so you're going to see it looks like Photoshop, you know, everywhere the same. So the point is that it's all about efficiency. That's what they are, by eliminating not aesthetics, they eliminated ethics. That's what I see that modernists wanted to eliminate. They eliminated ethics, meaning morality, because if you're thinking too much, if this is good, how it's going to be good in 20, 15 years, how other people are going to think about me. You cannot build fast. You cannot do things fast. And they wanted to change things very, very, very quickly. And they wanted to spread this idea all over the place. And that's how I see modernism. So when I say style, sorry, that's what I meant. I'm actually thinking, I think it's an idea that started really well to fix the world quickly with science. But people figured out that there is a lot of power in that. And they started using it to do things they wanted that are not fixing, but they were just taking power. And they deleted a lot of things. They took a lot of power very quickly. And they do that. I mean, it's the same with postmodernism. It's a good idea. Let's all be equal. You know, I mean, of course, yeah. But then they see there is power in that, and they start deleting. They start to monopolize everything with that. And then it goes in the wrong way. And, you know, that's what I don't like. I don't like the monopoly of any single idea. And I don't like when they take a good idea and they start abusing it and making it to a bad, you know. So that's when I said style. I didn't mean like the you know, how the building.
But I think more of the audience that will view this one, so they don't think that it's, you know, some kind of style award, that I prefer blue jeans and you prefer black jeans.
No. I think it's clear by now. Yeah. I think it's clear, and we can always do more. We are talking about the ideas. We are not talking about how things look like, you know. And unfortunately, a lot of people get stuck on how things look like. And you know, I mean, I have a friend who is a Greek architect, and he does brutalist classical, you know. So you can do that as well, and it kind of turns out okay. Why not, you know? So there is a lot of people experimenting with, but it depends how much respect they have for the overall knowledge, how much they respect and the previous knowledge and the people they're affecting, you know. So that's more important for me. But anyway, so you would like all the cities to be, you would like modernism to disappear. Do you see anything? Yes. Do you see anything valuable in modernism?
Well, you know, the first ideas you mentioned, but the modernism of the 50s and the 60s is not the same as the modernism of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. It began, you know, rational, solve housing problems, you know, give people modern apartments, connect to public transportation. And the whole idea, you know, is great in the beginning, you know, a rational way of construction, so we can fast construct many large apartments, you know, because people live, you know, they lacked, you know, a lot of things in their housing, and they lived in quite cramped conditions. So very, very quickly build in a rational, cost-efficient way, give people higher living standards. But, you know, it's this Pavlov stairs. So after a while, most people that moved to these modernist areas, they realized that they had so many shortcomings. And the big one was, you know, the alienation and the sterility. You know, everything that was life was lacking from these spaces. Everything was, you know, functionally designed. You are stored there, you know, you sleep there at night, you are stored there, and then you go to city to work. You recreate in one place, you sleep in one place, and you do this function in another place. You know, they removed life from everywhere. What is life? And they also removed, and this was an intentional goal in the beginning as well, they removed, you know, cultural expressions. because all these wars, we want to remove, the difference between, human beings. So, a concrete box expresses nothing. It doesn't matter. You can't see, and it doesn't matter if it's in Zimbabwe or if it's in Serbia or if it is in Sweden. So that was also an intention. So basically, they reduced us. At the beginning, it was not intentional, but that was the outcome. They reduced us, to machines. Eat, sleep, go to work.
Exactly, efficiency.
Yeah, efficient. But that is not what happened later. The housing shortage was mostly sold after the 60s I can say at least in Western Europe. So what happened then is that it morphed this ideology to the cult of the new. So as I mentioned, the most important attribute of a building is that it has never been built before. Everything else doesn't matter. And you have very, very few tools to make this. You are not allowed to use ornaments. You are not allowed to use classical principles. The only thing you can do is you can use better and better math, and now we have aid of computers, and you twist the building in a strange way. So it's not even efficient anymore. It's just very, very strange, very, very ugly. And that's what you get when the purpose is only new. That's what you get architecture prizes. That's how you get recognized as an architect. And that's why architects are taught today. Everyone wants to create a building that looks new in a way that, it's not good, it's not beautiful. It's just, it's twisted in a way that hasn't been done before. So they use computers now to get aid for that. So that's the current phase of modernism. And it's just everything is so absurd. And these people, they don't know anything. They don't know basic architecture. They don't know urbanism because they haven't been taught. They have only been taught that they should never look back, that they should only follow their own intuition, that everyone is some kind of artist. 99% of architects in history were just very well taught. They made very good average buildings because they had been taught to do very good average buildings. And then there were a few very, very talented architects. They created the marvelous buildings. But a majority of the very beautiful buildings in our downtowns, classical buildings in our downtowns, they were not by average architect, not by any specially or any star architect. But the building is still good because the average was so high because they got so good education.
I'm just remembering all the houses. Like, for example, a friend of mine got a place in Zaha Hadid entire quarter in Milan, and I went to visit him. I mean, first, I don't like too much walking. Very badly designed apartment is no different than where I grew up in the 80s in Belgrade in blocks. But it just feels so absurd to enter that place in the center of Milan. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever, because when I lived in Milan for almost 5 years in the center of Milan, and it doesn't make any sense for me to go in a Zaha Hadid place or Samsung Smart City in Milan. It doesn't make any sense. I don't know why that was allowed. It's because I know Milan. I moved to Italy in '99, so when they still had the lira, and I was very lucky to taste that part of Italy. And then now I'm going there and I see finally they don't have any skyscrapers back then in Milan, and they were resisting that, and that's why I like Italians. They always resist that a little bit. Much more than other European cultures. But
the thing is with Zaha Hadid and all these modernist buildings, they can be cool, but cool is a very it's a very short-term attribute. When we were young, how we dressed then, we dressed to be cool. But when you look at these photos, from us in the 90s, we don't think that we look cool, because cool is very fading. It's a short fashion. It lasts for 10, 15 years, and then there's something new. So if you build with the intention of making something that look cool, it will age very, very badly. But, beauty is timeless. Beauty is as beautiful. A building that is 200 years old or 300 years old, they're both beautiful. Because it's more timeless value. It's not.
Well, it's the same principle as in fashion. It's fast architecture. They're building it fast. They're changing the styles very fast, and without actually listening to people, they don't see the damage they make, and the press, and nobody wants to talk about the damage. And people who invested in that, they don't want to talk about it because obviously they're going to lose the investment, and they're blocking it. So anyway, I mean, for me is enough. I mean, you said a lot of things. I'm trying. Let me check my notes. I think we passed everything. We agree on basically a lot of the points, and I think that I am skeptical that politicians are the key. I think that what I'm trying to do with product innovation. So that's why we started with that area, because that's the safest one where we can really learn how the processes work. So we recognize that there are elements in product design that 100% cannot be done by as an individual or a research team in a company. Like, for example, safety. The biggest expert in safety is the person using a product. Especially, so we recognize that that companies don't have this information. They don't have this information. So that's why we focused on opening up the product design. And again, we are working with people making tools for factories, like really serious stuff, and not like a simple plastic thing at home, not consumer stuff, but B2B stuff. And we started opening that up, and what we noticed, my company, we are change managers. We change companies to be more open. So we noticed that the owners are very happy, the designers are very happy, and the product users are very happy, and the bosses of product users, everybody's happy. Everybody's super happy once we introduced openness.
I can add a very important thing is that building classical can be very much profit maximizing. Especially in more mature markets, that's why they build it a lot in certain places. It depends on market values. But say that it costs, I don't say that it costs more, but say that it costs 10% more, then you can sell it for 50% more. If you study, especially in Germany, that have a kind of special housing situation, in many places, they build classical just for market logic, because it can sell for a higher profit than if you build modernist. I have a friend, an Estonian architect. He was, a developer tried him, and they built a classical house in Tallinn, a classical apartment house. It sold the fastest ever, since Estonia got its independence. They never, an apartment house has sold, away that quickly. All apartments, that quickly they were lost. So of course the developer thought, oh, this is a great idea. So he built another apartment house, a classical apartment house, success. And then he built another one, and then he built a fourth one. And what happened then? The modernists in the modernist establishments, majority, 99% of architects in Estonia, they got so upset. So they talked to the municipality, and the municipality forbade new classical buildings to be built. Villas is still allowed, but not apartment houses. The reason stated is that people can get confused of the age of the building. They can believe that it's old. So it's like a recognition. Oh, if it's ugly, then it must be new. And if it's beautiful, then it must be old. It's stupid. And that's how very much modernists work. They always, because they don't trust that people will choose them, so they forbid all other options. So that's also, a stage, but it is profit maximizing to build classical. And as soon as a developer notices this, the better.
Yeah, well, I think modernists are just going by impulse now, by instinct, by repetition. I think they forgot, as you said, what it used to be. I mean, they can read in the books and they can know the theory, but they don't remember the feeling, because it came later in Yugoslavia. I grew up in Socialist Federative Republic of Yugoslavia, so in this big country with that fall apart in the 90s. And I remember, I remember also my parents, that when they for them, modernism was like unbelievable. It was unbelievable, because one day you would look at marshes and like grass. Like 5 years later, there was like, you could house 1 million people. It was unbelievable for them. It's like going to the moon or something.
But they got running water. They got running water. They got electricity, and then maybe they even got an own apartment. So I buy that. It was a promise, and part of the promise was delivered. But
and that feeling.
Sooner than later, the people realize that, oh, this. When you have these things, then you realize that there is much more.
And what I'm saying is that feeling of that age, like 40s, after the World War II, when people were like, actually my grandmother, my father was too young, back then. So my grandmothers, they were like, wow, amazing. That feeling was amazing. And then the people still are citing that they're like the Christian priest who knows the scripture by heart, but doesn't understand the feeling of the Christ or something like that. They forgot the feeling. And they don't understand why modernism was so powerful. But they understand it has power. And they fight for the power to maintain the power, but they don't understand why it has power, why it liberated people. And there is no more need. There is no need now to liberate. Now you need to, stop the monopoly. They fixed everything, and they need to go into, they need to open up and relax a little bit and stop being so monopolizing. That's my impression. Anyway, Michael, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Anything else you want to add?
No, I'm fine. I hope that people will find this interesting, and I want everyone to know that you should believe their eyes. And there are organizations now in every country. There is one now for former Yugoslavia, I can tell you. So I'm in contact with a Serbian architecture professor, actually. She is a professor in Nice. I hope I pronounced that city name right. Niš. Yeah. And there's I know, people in Croatia, in Novi Sad, I know. So there are, people envious all of Europe now of people that want to change it, both architects and laymen, people with tons of different professions. So just organize, look, for your local organization and just work passionately, because you're doing something that is right and that is important. A beautiful built environment for everyone, not only for the rich, but for everyone to live beautiful, because it affects us so much, our built environment. That's why we like to, why do people go to Italy? Why do people go to France? Is it for the concrete housing blocks? No, it's for one reason is for the beautiful architecture. Of course, the other things, the beautiful food, but it's, the same mentality. As you mentioned, food, it's the classical Italian food. It's not, refined supermarket food you go to Italy for, or refined everything. You go, processed, I mean, not refined. So believe your eyes and yeah, I'm just mumbling now.
No, I have one question.
So cut this one, but really, believe your eyes and know that you are allowed to believe your eyes and have opinions about your built environment, because that has been suppressed. You are not an architect, so you have no right to. That's what they say. You have not a right to express, what you feel when you see these buildings. You have the right, because you are the, end consumer. You will see these buildings every day. Why shouldn't you have a say how they look?
Cool. I wanted to ask you, what's your favorite city in the world?
Oh, that's a very, very hard question.
Or one of the favorites, something that you like.
Favorites. There are many cities that are, lovely, but I remember it will be so stereotypical, but Vienna or Rome, but more Rome than Vienna. Not because Vienna was not fantastically beautiful, but Rome has such a pulse, and Italians are so lively, and they are so they dress naturally so good. When I see a Swede in a very nice costume, it looks so stiff, but when I see an Italian in a very nice costume, he's so relaxed. It's so natural. When he walks around.
But I have to tell you something that worries me about Italy. So now we are chatting more. Is that, for example, I was always saying that Italian food. Italy is my second home. So I work with Italians since '99. I don't live there, but I think more Italians are going to watch this video. So I don't not Serbs. So that's why you do it in English and etc. So I always consider, for me, Italian food was the number one. Meaning you go to 10 restaurants are going to be perfect. So you go, and Greek food was the second, for me. But this year I switched it, and I asked many restaurant owners in Italy, because this year I did, I think, 3 or 4 trips to Italy. We crossed by car all the way from Trieste to Palermo once, and then Trieste to Napoli, and then we went to Rome and some other stuff. So I have to go often to Italy, and I like to take my family. We did really like a month of traveling around Italy, and I ask a lot of restaurant owners. And of course, in Napoli, they still have the same cook as 20 years ago, and the owner, the 80-year-old owner, is there with a son who is 40 years old, and their kids are there waiting tables. But in Rome, when I spoke to owners, they are not that. They are a guy who owns 5 restaurants and 5 companies, and he opened up just so. And you can see the food is now getting worse and worse, And
it gets standardized. It's not a passion. It's a work. So it's a very, very big difference. That's why, with architecture and AI, then you reduce architecture to work, not to something passionate, something that people create. Maybe so, but there is another city that I like very much. Also,
no, Rome is wonderful. I mean, I have to go once a year.
But when it comes to this, because of course you want the flow and you want the people, and Tel Aviv is a very, very ugly city. It's like a modernist Mecca, but there was beauty once in Tel Aviv, and they're starting to renovate it once. It was, the eclectic architecture of before the 1930s. It's very, very beautiful, and they started renovating now. And you have, the Mediterranean sun and the Mediterranean Sea, and then you have this beautiful, eclectic, colorful buildings. And then, of course, you have the Pulse. So that's also a very, very nice city, but it's not a favorite city like Rome, or I have many favorite cities. So it's very hard for me to find like this only place. Every place has, its beauty. I like Lviv in Ukraine very, very much. Very, very nice city. Budapest was nice also. I like Stockholm. I like certain smaller Swedish cities very much. Helsinki was nice. So it's a combination of many factors. But in general, they are beautiful. They are a bit. I hate high rises. In classical architecture, you have the maximum 6 stories of a building, and then you have religious buildings and institutions that pop up them. Then you get a much better scale. You feel more human in such a city when you're surrounded by high rises everywhere. So probably smaller cities. Most smaller cities I would like even more. But I haven't traveled. I've traveled much, but not enough. To say this is the place.
Never mind. Cool. So I'm gonna stop the recording, and I'm gonna say bye to you personally. So we are finishing the video. I'm gonna stop it now. Thank you very much, Michael.